How are you all? Welcome to our CIA's webinar, free webinar on Venus Star Point Leo. We are doing a masterclass on this topic next week, next Friday, in a week's time. And we want to, let's say, introduce what we are working on with the Venus star, because Venus is making her star point in the next few days, mid next week at 21 Leo. So for those of you, I think we've turned on quite a few people into working with the Venus star over the years and our commitment to the work there. Today I have with me to introduce more about Venus and what she's up to this week is Gemini Brett in the top left corner. Everyone knows our starry teller Gemini, Agent 1123. Hi Gemini, thanks for joining us.
Hi, it's my treat. Good to see you.
That's the way. And down, well, I'm not sure how everyone's seeing this, but below is Ariel Gutman, who is Agent 005, and for a good reason, because she's probably one of the astrologers in the world that has done the most work on the Venus star. Welcome, Ariel.
Thank you, Julia. Welcome to everybody. Glad to be here.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks so much for what we've learned from you, or from each other actually over the years. This is now the fourth point that we've come together with, haven't we? You know, we started off with when Venus star point happened in Aries, about 5 degrees in March 2017. The next point happened conjunct Pluto in January 2018. And we're living now in the cycle of what started at the star point of Scorpio, 3 degrees Scorpio last October. And we're at the peak of that middle part of Venus's cycle now, as she is in the outer conjunction. So briefly, just maybe we can recap slightly how the last 9.5 months have gone for us since the Venus star point in Scorpio. Gemini, do you want to just fill us in with something there?
Wow, I mean, in the world or in my life, are you saying? I was talking about me. I've been in really significant transition and transformation, which I think is a Scorpio star point thing. The star point in October 26, 2018 was very close to my own sun, which is the first degree of Scorpio. So it had some personal activations for me. And I've just moved out of Seattle, where I was 17 years, and now in the Bay Area and living in a couple places. And so it's a really significant change. But I think, especially with this Leo point coming up, that's a lot more sunshine, a lot more light in my life. And that's one of the things that I'm most interested in speaking about in our webinar next week, and getting into these charts for the Scorpio Cazimi, the interior Cazimi, and then into this Leo Cazimi that's coming our way. Because I work with them as kind of two parts of one system or one cycle. And so I think I'll get back into that in a little bit, maybe hear from Ariel, who I think will have a lot more to say about how the world is riding the wave of the Venus star right now.
Yeah.
Yes, Ariel, what's your take on, you know, the climate of the last 9.5 months, really, since we had Venus star point Scorpio and about to transition into Venus star point Leo?
Well, first off, I want to say that the last 3 star points, including this one coming up, the Leo now, the Scorpio 9 months ago, and the Capricorn 9 months before that, were all connected to Pluto. In the Capricorn star, as you mentioned, it was a morning star and it was conjunct Pluto. An evening star and it was conjunct Pluto. It was like 19, the Capricorn star was about 19, and Pluto at the same time was like 19, 20 Capricorn, so they were really tight. And then we moved 9 months later to the Scorpio star, morning star, and of course that sign is ruled by Pluto. And as Gemini said, you know, it was kind of a dark period, especially for those of us, I think around the world, but for those of us living in Northern California, it was extremely dark because the week of the star point, we had raging fires here, and the town that I live right next to, Paradise, California, 10 miles up the road, was pretty much decimated and completely evacuated, and smoke was hovering in the air for weeks. It went to the Bay Area, it went miles around, and everybody was feeling that dark. It was almost like the Scorpio star point came alive in a collective way to everybody who was feeling it at that time. And we're coming out of that, and as you said, we're coming into a lighter period because we're moving into the Leo evening star. But interestingly enough, the moment the Cazimi happens in Leo, like within the next hour, it makes a quincunx. Both planets, the Sun and Venus, make a quincunx to Pluto. So here we have more Pluto. So in summary, we're living in very Plutonian times. Venus star usually activates the light, the brightness, the feeling of the heart and the soul. But we're living in times when our heart is being asked to, in some ways with Pluto, grieve and accept the losses that are happening. Right now we're having all this huge gun debate. We've just had 2 or 3 mass shootings in a row. So I think we can feel the Pluto undertones of the Venus star all around us. It's not usually like that with the Venus star, but the times we're in right now is particularly Plutonian.
Yeah, right, which very much calls for the transformation that we're all going through, you know, as a collective as well. I'm just going to share my screen here so that we can, yeah, I found, you know, probably a lot of us know of Vladimir Kush's surrealist work, which is fantastic. So, you know, often I kind of scan his work, and I looked at this and thought, oh my gosh, that's the Venus kiss, isn't it? You know, how perfect to denote, you know, the Sun and Venus coming together. Although, of course, Venus is on the other side, as furthest away from us that she can be at the moment. So she's invisible. She's in the underworld, as Gemini will talk a bit more about. You know, but we can sense her, we can feel her. And I often find that these times when Venus is, you know, doing what she's doing now, coming toward the outer conjunction and moving very fast, it's very, very high anxiety times, actually, where there's so much sort of happening. Again, Venus is moving very, very fast, and we're very sort of put on the, you know, put through a test much more than we are with Venus retrograde, because Venus, of course, when she's doing the star point in a retrograde fashion, she's slow and she's much more sort of deliberate and yeah, of course, moving slowly. And not saying that those points aren't challenging as well and can be very confronting, but this one is just more high anxiety and also, you know, goes a lot with what's going on at the moment as well. So for those people that aren't very aware of the Venus star points, there's 5 of them, magically 5 of them that repeat in the same spot every 4 years, but oscillate from being an interior conjunction to an outer conjunction, what we call exterior conjunction. And at the moment, we're at this August 2019, 0.21 Leo. 4 years ago, Venus was retrograde there. So some of you might, you know, have a look back and go, what happened in August 2015 in my life, to really reflect upon what this star point might be all about, because we're having a view of the same point from a different perspective. So from what we call the interior conjunction again to the outer conjunction, even though magically it all aligns up with the same point in the zodiac, 21 Leo, Venus is actually in a completely different position in her cycle. So, you know, 21 Leo, I remember it's really interesting. I did my first webinar online first webinar online to my fans and followers at the time on Venus star retrograde in Leo. So how cool is that? And it happens in my 9th house, trining my ascendant, and in conjunct my sun. So these are the kind of things we want to look at where is that 21 Leo? We actually want to look at where all those points are in our astrology chart. So actually, in a sense, have them in your chart all the time and consider where they are and what star point is coming up next. And Ariel has, we'll put it in the link on her website, a PDF of where all these star points are and continually kind of moving. So you can check the around the time you were born, the five star points when you were around when that were around or being made when you were born, to the 5 star points that are happening now, and understand that they slowly move backwards in our astrology charts over time. So anyway, something really well worth following and looking at. And of course, where Venus is right now, actually, I'm not sure if you can see my pointer. Let me just start. Can we see that now? Spotlight, here we go. She is now coming up to this position where we call Venus at her fullest phase. We can't see her, of course, but she's actually the only time when she is actually, in a sense, full, like a full moon in the sky. So that says a lot about her, let's say, movement there and what's going on out there. Anything you want to add at any time, agents, just chime in as I go through some of these slides. So Venus,
Okay, I want to
this
say
little
something.
point here. Okay, great.
This, notice how Julie has on her slide 1.6 years. That's the synodic cycle of Venus. That's so important in what I felt was initially the geometry of the Venus star and the actual interpretation, mathematical, because everyone that has written about the 1.6, which is connected to the spiral, the pi ratio, is supposedly a beautiful number, a harmonious number in mathematics and in design and in art. And so what struck me immediately was that how lovely Venus and the sun and the earth together have this 1.6 cycle that she goes through over and over and over again to make the star and to complete her orbit. And again, it's not Venus acting alone, it's Venus and the earth together acting around the sun. And so it's a relationship to begin with. It's not a solo journey. It's like you partner with someone and you do this 1.6 dance. So I thought that was important because they consider 1.6, mathematicians and everybody that works with it, design and art and photography, as harmonious, as beautiful and pleasing, and something that moves us from the inside. And so I just thought that's worth mentioning. That's what Venus does for us in this Venus star.
Yes, definitely, Ariel. We've talked about that many times actually in our webinars. So I will also put a link into the thread after all of this about, in the first session that we did on Venus Aries, we looked into all the connections of Venus and sacred geometry and the Fibonacci sequence and the 1.6 ratio that she, in her cycle, repeats everywhere. And it makes you kind of, consider that the Venus cycle and the Venus star and how it's made in our astrology is very much created to a creation story of our own. As Venus, you said, it's a synodic lineup with the sun, Venus, and the earth. And even when we think about the representation of Venus's symbol, she has got a sun, the sun glyph on top, the manifestation of earth that embeds her into what we're doing in this lifetime on earth. And then the combination is of purpose and creativity and living a life we love. That's how I see working with Venus and the Venus star is actually all about. And I've often talked about the Venus star and the Venus cycle as very, very much showing us the fractal nature of astrology and how it works in our lives. So, you know, in this image, we can see that not only have we got the Leo star point, you know, peaking at the moment or in the next couple of days, but it's part of a bigger pattern. It's part of an 8-year cycle. It's part of a 4-year cycle. It's part of a 40-year cycle. There's so many applications to looking at Venus. Venus returns to the same position of the zodiac. Venus returns to, you know, the 8-year cycle of retrogrades. That, I think, is what most astrologers will talk about, the 8-year returns. But again, we want to invite you to all consider more the 4-year interim bits as well. So as we can see, this is just a graph of, as Ariel was saying, very Mars-Pluto related cycle that we're in at the moment. And this Leo star point that peaks now is, what's the word, in conjunct Pluto as well. And then the next new cycle, as this one ends, begins in Gemini, which repeats the story of 2012 and 2004 for us. Which were the Venus transits, which I have to say that they were the things that actually got me more interested in the Venus star, because there wasn't enough information about it in 2004. Do you remember back then, Gemini? 2004 Venus?
Yeah, in 2004, I definitely was not following. I mean, I wasn't hip to astrology yet, so...
Yeah,
I'm not
right.
even sure what my relationship with Venus was, besides I was following my saxophone all over the place. I mean, fortunately, I did get hip to these things before 2012 and was able to catch that transit. But in 2004, I was not in any way clued in yet.
Yeah, right. Yes, well, you were by 2012 though, weren't you?
Yeah, and that's actually the year that I found astrology. So, and I went and saw that transit. I think it was a huge part of it. I remember that that Northern Hemisphere summer that year, you know, and preparing for the big December 21st, 2012 thing, which was a thing on my radar for sure. But I remember that summer, and especially the June solstice that year, just being such a significant opening. And then, I mean, I was fortunate to find out about the Venus star by my 40th birthday. It's a very significant Venus year, and I went to Hawaii and had a great ceremony around it. And I've kind of been a disciple ever since. For sure.
It got you big time. And you called Gemini, the Gemini transit. The transits, Venus crossing the face of the sun, only happen every 108 and 120 years, either in Gemini and Sagittarius in this big time frame of the world. And yeah, so these last two transits, 2004, 2008, happened in Gemini at around 14, 15 degrees, 16 degrees. Oh, got the sun coming in on me. I remember Ariel and I were in Mexico, and we met for the first time just before the Venus transit in 2012. So it's really great to still be connected on this topic, that's for sure. So next year is a big one as it repeats or comes back to the point of 14 Gemini where the transits happened.
Yeah, and it's linked, you know, it's cool to hear you mentioning kind of the 4-year thing, right? So the 8 years is the repetition of the cycle, but every 4 years there could be kind of an archetypal reversal. And so the Leo cycle, or that star, I was born into that star point back when it was in Virgo, and its reflection or its other side is Gemini. And actually the last one that we had was so strongly aligned to Venus's node. It's like would have been, I mean, even more so than either of the transits that we saw, but of course we couldn't see it because Venus was on the other side of the sun. And I think that's a very important thing in the consideration of this Leo Cazimi next week that we'll be speaking about at length next week as well, is how do we treat the interior conjunctions and Venus retrograde passing between Earth and Sun versus how do we treat the exterior conjunctions.
Yeah.
And so in Ariel's work, she'll show one at the beginning of the morning star Venus period, and the other is the beginning of the evening star Venus period. And I work so much with the invisibility of Venus at this time. And it was really powerful also to hear Ariel speaking about how, and you, Julia, about how much Pluto's been involved in all of these cycles recently, because we're really feeling that. I mean, not only moving from a fire kind of Leo cycle and an Aries cycle and the Scorpio cycle. And I think that, what I'm seeing in the world and what I'm seeing in personal consultations as well, and this is one thing that I'm kind of really want to focus on this week ahead, is the strength in people who are coming forward now and even allowing themselves to speak about, or some first allowing themselves to see just painful, traumatic abuses in youth, right? And hopefully some of these false kings will fall as this star kind of marks a time where we come into the ways of love's honor and the courage of the radiant global goddess, as I like to call and consider Venus.
That's perfect. I love that. I like that you, do point out the importance of the outer conjunctions as well, because in 2016 in June, as is now, in a sense, it's August now, but America was getting prepared for its next elections, okay? And we had the rise of a very significant Gemini in 2016. And now there's the race, and Ariel, I know, is going to talk about this more next week, but how looking at the candidates' charts of who's coming into the American election for next year. 2020 is a big one, yeah?
Yeah. That's an interesting thing, a pattern that maybe a lot of people don't know about. And first of all, I want to say that, we follow all the planets around. We know where the outer planets are usually transiting, what degrees and everything, where Pluto, the nodes, Neptune, Uranus, Chiron, etc. But we don't always know about the Venus star clock that's operating in the background. It is operating in the background, and I do call it the cosmic heartbeat. But the way the pattern is right now is that every 4 years, we forget sometimes about the 4-year return because we're so used to talking about Venus and the 8-year return. But every 4 years, we do have in the US a presidential election. And the 4 years that we have, in the 4-year periods, the years that we have those elections, it's always in this current timeline, Gemini, in the Gemini star, that the election occurs. The election's always in November, and the Gemini star happens usually when the big primary week is, and all the states are sweeping the primaries in June. That's when the Cazimi occurs. But the 9 months before that, Gemini star has always been Leo. And before I even knew about this pattern, or that there was a Venus star and that it was in Leo, I used to call this period politicians on parade. I had just nicknamed that because there were always like 10, 15, now there's 20, in excess of 20, marching across the stage, doing their Leo things, strutting up there, showing us who they are and what they've got. And more or less, it's not the serious part of, that won't happen until the June, when we kind of eliminate all the others and get down to, who does it come down to, the elimination process. But right now it's like the trials. And I find it interesting that it's in Leo, because not only does it take a lot of courage, and this is really the theme of the Leo star, I think, every 4 years. It takes a lot of courage, especially for the unknowns or the little knowns, to get up on stage and to really talk about who they are and what they've got, and have the limelight on them and millions of people watching, and being open for scrutiny and criticism and really tough questions. I mean, they really have to have their act together and rehearsed. And I think that this part is a lot goes a lot with the Leo theme of being on stage and acting and being dramatic and being, because that's what people are looking for right now, and that's what people are reacting to. And for instance, I'm taking some of the lesser known, not the well-known candidates that we know and expect to be up there running in 2020, but some of the ones who came from nowhere behind the scenes and just suddenly they're getting a lot of attention in their life at this time. And what's so fascinating about it is the 21 Leo Venus star point is hitting their chart in a very dynamic way.
That's the thing about the star point, isn't it? It's like if it shows up, and when you look at it and go, oh, and that's happening as well, with the other transits, the star point, again, very significant in my research as well. Gemini, you're going to say something?
No, I mean, I'm just spending a lot of time right now contemplating the 4-year thing, because the first cycle that I really practiced with was the 2014 cycle. It began in January with a Capricorn Cazimi, and the exterior point of that one was Scorpio. I mean, in the same place where this 2018 interior Cazimi was, right? And so it was right on my sun. And so it was cool just to see that kind of activating and calling me into this cycle. I would like to speak about the courage bit a little. Yulia, could I share a few slides on my side?
Stop there.
Let's see, and then I'll do this. So we're using this, or Yulia found this to be the image to promote this webinar, this gathering for our 4th Venus star point. And it sounds like for the 5th one, and of course that's such a powerful number, maybe we're going to have a gathering on Earth and go celebrate this together. And it's a big one, and Ariel and I agree that the Gemini point of the star, for reasons really that Yulia mentioned before, either the Venus transits are in Gemini or in Sagittarius. It's kind of the leading point of the star at our time. And also very interesting, and something I shared about a couple times ago, we'll see that 2 of the star points will change signs kind of simultaneously or in the same mini epoch, I guess, and another one's kind of doing like on its own quest, and this feels like it's the Gemini thing. But right now, this Leo point, and I'm going to show you, this is the Thoth Tarot Luster card. And interestingly, Crowley did this thing where he took the 8 and the 11 and he flipped them from what we see in most decks. Like this is the Marseille deck on the left, and on the right, the Rider-Waite that so many are familiar with. And you'll see the Rider-Waite lion or strength card is the 8, right? And there you'll find that balance is the 11. And Crowley said he was going back to an older time where the 8 was strength and the 11 was balanced. And I think it's interesting. One thing I kind of thought we might get into today is this 8-8 Lionsgate business. I don't necessarily want to go there now, but I think it's beautiful to see this this conquering of the lion, and shown in very different ways here, right? In the Rider-Waite on the right, it's more just this kind of petting the pet lion. The Lust card from the Thoth deck is often talked about overcoming our own inner lions or dragons. But this is an old ancient image of Inanna, right? Which was the Sumerian name for Venus. And you often see her taming the lion in this way. And we'll see this in many of the powerful kind of Asian alchemical images too, or the medieval or Renaissance alchemical images of taming the tiger or taming the lion, which is conquering fear, right? And for me, that's so much of what's happening here. And I love that you've called out this, like, perfect quincunx. We bring in Neptune, certainly not as strongly aligned, but there's this yod arrow from Neptune and Pluto at K2, like pointing to this Venus Cazimi. And I see those yods as very active, aspect groups, but they're happening from the blind spaces in many regards. And I see the exterior conjunction, which this is the Venus direct conjunction to the sun. And as Yulia showed us earlier, that's Venus behind the sun. And I mean, I understand that kind of as a fullness of the cycle, But being such a sky guy, it's also the absolute opposite thing from them, because this is in the middle of the period where we can't see Venus. And Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, where I first learned about Venus and the star, we treat this as Venus in the underworld, and see it very closely aligned to the great Sumerian story of Inanna's descent, right? And so this is a time in the story where she's literally being resurrected from these meat hooks that she was hung on. I'll speak more about this next week. But I'm really looking at how that those hooks are really like Venus on the cross at the time, because I see this in a sense as I see a full moon as the reflection of the new moon seeds that we plant, or the flowering. I see this as part of the Scorpio cycle. And I call it now, I used to call this, well, I don't need to get into all that right now, but I'm thinking of this as a Scorpio-Leo cycle. And the idea is, how can the Scorpio intention be transformed through Leo initiations? And I think that's a very basically opposite archetypal journey than we would usually consider, where typically it would be, okay, here we are, and the intention is to shine our highest lights and be that courageous, radiant self, and all of these Leo themes, and that the initiation is going to have to be going into the darkness for the Scorpio transformations and all that. But what I'm looking at here is, in a way, like, how can we overcome, first of all, some of what is said about Scorpio, like Scorpio needs to be hidden and remain unseen. And I mean, I might be perpetuating that by calling myself Gemini Brett, since my sun is in Scorpio, as we know. But as maybe someday I'll be Scorpio Brett when I'm ready. But anyway, I'm seeing, well, how does that want to be transformed through Leo initiations? And I think it's a kind of a coming to the light moment. And, you know, I think on one level, we really need to be careful with spiritual bypassing and just going for the new age mantra of the moment, to ignore the pains and of the human condition and what's happening in the world. But I also see a very strong thing that's happening with shadow workers today, who are kind of, it feels like bypassing the true work by claiming that if it doesn't hurt, it's not growth. And this to me is kind of the principal theme of this 19-month happening that began last October. And the transformation now is, how can we continue to transform even if times are beautiful and times are radiant? Or how can we go to that side of us? And here we see inner power, lust for life, joy, love, purpose, celebration, confidence, pride, self-love, and pride again. Thank you, Julia, right? Because lions roll in prides, and for a reason. And pride is not arrogance, and self-love is not vanity, and confidence is not cockiness, as our world teaches. These fixed signs, my mantra for them is fix yourself to fix the world. They are signs of personal power. And so, of course, they are the energies that our corrupt culture would most attempt to mute in us. And so what I'm really interested in, I'll look at this next week, is some of these charts, how we can use the Scorpio point in October 26, 2018 with some of the planetary placements, including Uranus in Taurus, and so Uranus in Taurus is at 6 degrees, and the moon at the time of the Venus Cazimi next week is in 7 degrees Aquarius.
I've got that chart. We can look at it in a sec.
Cool. Well, yeah, to look at them together, but, you know, I'll do it more next week. But basically, there's T squares that are happening in the fixed signs that are pointing, the T square next week are pointing to Scorpio, where the Venus Cazimi was in October. And in October, there was another T square that's pointing to Leo, where the Cazimi will be next week. And so it's really cool to see that these two parts of a cycle, the way that I see it, are really bringing us into that fixed cross. And I think it's encouraging us to take our journey into our own power back. And yes, sometimes that is a complete surrender to the forces and allowing our strength to come through again. But sometimes I think it's also avoiding this temptation to think that it has to be hard for us to grow.
Yeah, good point. Very good. And yeah, enjoying the process as much as we can, knowing that it's got a purpose of some other kind perhaps as well. One thing you mentioned, Gemini, was we don't ever see Venus in her fullness, and that says something about, like, in the real sky reality, we see Venus in a phase. We see her, you know, very low in the sky in a gibbous phase somewhat, but we never see her full, and that says something about her underworld journey as well. It's almost like a journey that you get flung out to actually, let's say, conquer on your own, where no one else kind of knows how vulnerable you are, or only you know. It's a personal kind of journey, this part of the journey, isn't it? That you sort of take. I've always said it's Venus on a mission. There's something that has to be done. Even, you know, you have to pull through it, push through it, go through it, like a retrograde as well. It's as intense, I think so. Although, you know, of course, it's just a lot quicker transition from from morning star to evening star, which says something like Adam Gainsbourg, who's going to be part of the webinar next week, calls it the transmutation phase, where we're going, Venus is moving from morning star to evening star. So, you know, symbolically, that's quite potent and quite profound as well for what we're going through right now. And I really like how this particular Leo point, again, tying in from last Scorpio point to the midpoint of this cycle, so to speak, into how much it does tie into Pluto, but also that resonant point of 2020, when all the planets are actually gathering at, you know, 22 degrees of Capricorn. So we're already looking ahead. I've always seen the Venus star points as encouraging us to also look ahead. So we're looking ahead at the next 9 months now. We're not just, you know, in this moment for this next few weeks or this next week. We're actually transitioning to another 9.5 month journey. And that's very potent when we think about 9.5 months. It's very important to human life in general. And it was important to the Mayans, I believe. And just again, think of what now we should be looking at more, getting ready to what this Gemini point means for us as well. I really love what's happening now too, and I pointed out in a post the other day, is, okay, we've got the star point happening here at 21 Leo. It's in conjunct to another star point that is around 18, 19 degrees of Capricorn. But we've got Chiron on a star point in Aries. The star point actually happens about 4 degrees of Aries, and we've got Uranus stationing opposite the Scorpio point at 3 Scorpio. So Uranus is stationing around there to turn direct. And we have Jupiter also stationing to go direct opposite the Gemini point. So in fact, this is what Venus does. She actually harmonizes, and you look at these star points to actually harmonize, as Venus is known for, what else is going on in your astrology charts, or, you know, just in the collective, you know, moving of the planets. So they're all playing a role here. All the star points are somehow playing a role here, which is pretty cool. This Gemini had a graph here before, but just some of the major sort of points that she will be going through over the next 9.5 months is what Adam Gainsbourg is actually going to talk about in our full masterclass webinar next week, where he goes through all, you know, the what he calls the Venus phases of this next 9.5 months. So, you know, we look forward to that. He couldn't be with us here today. So again, look, you know, kind of like planning out the trajectory of Venus over the next 9.5 months. So yeah, this is what we certainly encourage for everybody to, you know, keep an eye on where 21 Leo is now, where 13, 14 Gemini is, and what's coming up. What would you suggest for people, you know, working with this point right now as well, agents? Again, gaining confidence, you know, what's the mission that you're on? So I think some people won't even recognize that there's maybe enough happening around Venus, but again, still yourself and consider what is going on and where 21 Leo points in your own chart.
I understand the whole concept of the sky astrology and seeing the planet and feeling it is maybe even more powerful. But we don't see things when eclipses are happening. We don't see a lot of things that are actually happening. There's sometimes an eclipse is happening on the other side of the world, and we're nowhere near it, but we feel it nonetheless. And I want to say the same thing about this full phase of Venus. Okay, she's hidden. When Venus gets within 10 degrees of the sun, astrologers always say she's combust. So planets that are combust are kind of, losing their energy to the sun in a way. But when she gets to Cazimi, which is exactly smacking into the sun, it's what I call the kiss of Venus to the sun. When planets get that close, they become much more powerful. So the 21 Leo is interesting from the 4-year standpoint. And I'll just tell you a little story in my own chart. And that is that 4 years ago at the August 2015 one at 22 Leo, when she, let's say, started this Leo 8-year cycle, I moved that year from my long time home in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And by the way, that Leo star point was within 1 degree square to my moon. And the moon rules my 4th house of home. And the moon also rules things like family. I moved to California to take care of my mother. And here it is. Since then, she's passed, and that mission is complete. But here we are 4 years later, and it's again squaring my moon at 21. And it's the fullness of the cycle. And I am now, 4 years later, leaving California to go back to New Mexico. It's like I've come full circle, not full circle, but I've come, to that half of the 8-year star point. And I just thought, this is really interesting. And so this is what I want to kind of direct people to look at in their chart. How is the planet hitting? How is the star point hitting your chart, your planet? What planet is it? What does it represent? What house does it rule? And all of that, because that's a very important one for me and how it is shaped in my life. And I knew 4 years ago when I moved to California that I was going to get that other star point 4 years further down the road in 2019. And I was thinking, I wonder if I'm still going to be moving then, or I'm going to be moving again. And actually, I have been moving around back and forth and traveling a lot during this whole 4 years. So my moon has been sort of not steady and secure. It's been, responsive to the Leo star. It's been a grand time. And then I just wanted to comment on your slide, which I think is, I don't know if it was an unconscious choice or a conscious choice, but I saw the sword in the Leo, in the Crowley deck of the Leo card. I see the sword pointing to a word down at the bottom that says trumps. And I kind of feel like, that was up there on the horse, crowned, regal, who is Leo rising, by the way. And a lot of the politicians right now, going back to this politicians on parade theme that I was talking about before, have Leo in their chart. But I just think that's an interesting image. I saw the sword coming down to the trumps.
With some kind of a ball sack. No, I'm just kidding.
Like deflating. It looks like the sword is deflating a big balloon.
Right. Sorry, I couldn't help it.
I think it's rains. So
Right.
yeah, what I would encourage is for people that have a sky practice during the Cazimi. We'll be having this webinar actually after the Cazimi happens, right? And so wherever you are, find when Venus conjoins the sun, or basically, let me say it this way, on the August 13th and on the 14th, because it's the conjunctions on the 13th at night in the Pacific time zone. It'll be the 14th for most people. But basically those days, what I would invite you to, and I love that the sun is just kind of blaring through the window as I say this, go to the light, go to the sun. Like sit, close your eyes, really let the sun play on your eyelids. Sometimes we can have really cool visions that way. Sometimes you rub your eyes a little bit and activate that. And journey and find Venus aligned behind the sun. I mean, it's an amazing thing, as Ariel's mentioning, this idea of Cazimi in the heart of it, or in the throne room. Back in the day, it was like, oh, a planet's under the beams if it gets so close, and then it's combust within 8.5 degrees, and it's getting burnt up in the light of the sun. But somehow, when it's within 1 degree or stricter definition, within 17 arc minutes of the sun, it's Cazimi, and it's all good. And I've always seen that as the sun kind of lensing that planet's energy into us. And I think it beautifully speaks to, like, this alignment really speaks to, as does really any new moon, unless it's an eclipse that we're seeing. And I agree, Ariel. I mean, just because you don't see it doesn't mean you don't be it, I'd love to say. But I also do feel like when we come to the temple of the sky, we're opening our hearts and our experience in a direct way, where we can receive these things very quickly. And you can do this in the comfort of your own home. But if you head outside and just stare at the light, and what I would say is work in this way: put your hands on your heart, stare at the sun, and say, I'm doing it. Right. So
I have my eclipse classes, so I can do that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you can really stare at the ball of the sun. You might see Venus because she's not right behind the sun at this time, right? She has some latitude. But
Right.
a thing that I love about this as well is, like, whenever we have like a new moon, it speaks to the mysteries of a sign. Like right now, as the moon is in this like waxing phase, right? And you can go outside this evening and see a Sagittarius moon reflecting Leo light, and you can see what that emerging trine looks like. You can feel it in your body, but we're not allowed to see Leo, or we're not allowed to see Virgo, or Libra. It brings you into the true mystery, the great mystery of each of these signs. And I think there's something about Venus behind the sun sending us the mysteries of love, and to just feel that, and to feel that the guides and guidesses have your back, and you should too. So I think what I'm really promoting at this time is for us not to get down on ourselves, but look at these courageous things we've done in our lives. And yeah, they can be very much connected to our traumas, that can stimulate our own awakening. But I think we really get down on ourselves and say we're not doing it fast enough, I'm not on the path, etc. Utilize this, Cazimi, I will say, just to fill yourself with you. Stoke the inner mounted flame, the radiant Leo energetic. And the mantra, again, is just put your hands on your heart, look to the sun, think about where you were 4 years ago, and I promise you will see that you have grown significantly, and say, I'm doing this, and there's more to come.
Yeah, perfect. Exactly. Wow. So what a week. The details of the Cazimi, of course, will be posted if you're following us on our Facebook page, the exact times and that type of thing. So yeah, very, very potent time to do some kind of intention. Look at the sun, if the sun is up at the time. Light a candle if it's nighttime, and do envision what is happening, and what is happening co-creatively for you in your life at this Venus point in Leo. So now, just before we finish up, let's introduce a little bit more about, if you want more information about this Venus star, how to work it in your chart, how to work with the Venus star generally, then you need to sort of join our masterclasses. So Ariel's going to be the first one that is presenting next week, and it's going to be about a 4-hour class. So of course, if you can't make it all, you'll get the recordings. And again, we've done 3 of them already. So it is building up to some archives of some amazing material between the 4 of us, Ariel, Gemini, myself, and Adam Gainsberg, on working with Venus phases, the Venus cycle, the evening star, the morning star, and much more. Ariel, would you like to just take us through it somewhat on what you will be presenting for us next week?
Yes. Can I share my screen?
You can. I have got oh, hang on. Let's just stop that. Yes, go for it.
Okay. It's not sharing my screen, is it? Oh,
Yes,
maybe
we
it
can see
is.
your
Oh, here
screen.
it is.
Yeah.
Okay, here it is. There it is. So, there's a lot of numbers with Venus, and I don't want everybody to get too confused. But in the beginning, what I want to share is what the meaning is to move from one star point to the next clockwise around the wheel in the 9.5 month cycle that we had talked about. For instance, from last one was Scorpio, this one's Leo, the next one's Gemini. And the one that we're coming into, Leo, those other two are really important. The one we just came from, Scorpio, and the one we're going to, Gemini. And Gemini, this is like your signs. So you are really on the Venus star wheel right now, being a Scorpio sun and a double Gemini. And I do want to point out that the signs on the star right now are really activating for those people who are of those signs, like Sun, Moon, Ascendant, really activating their charts and their lives in a really dynamic way. So we'll talk about the sequence from one star to the next every 9 months and how to track it, and how to show where it is in your chart, because I'm constantly getting questions from clients about, well, I want to open a new business, or I want to launch this, or I want to publish my book, or I want to whatever it is that they want to do. And so I look at where the whole 5-point star sequence is in their chart to see, well, a very appropriate time to get that book published and ready for publication is when it falls in let's say, the Leo star point, which falls in your 9th house. Okay, because the 9th house is publishing, and the Leo is, maybe it's the first time you're putting yourself out there in a big way. It's different for every chart, but you'll find a way from looking at that 9.5 month cycle where it is and what to focus on. I call it, my Venus work for the next 9 months, or my Venus love. What do I want? What do I really throw my heart and soul into doing? What am I really concentrating on? And then there's the 4-year Leo star cycle, which we just talked about, so that we can look back 4 years and up 4 years to see a little bit bigger picture of how the repetitive heartbeat every 4 years through Leo in a certain house in your chart stimulates, like an acupuncture point, that particular region, and what's it stimulating for you. And then we're going to look a little bit more at the historical Venus star period, which I love, because the Venus star stays in a sign. It moves very slowly. In 8 years, you'll only see it move a degree or a degree and a half around that sign, from an 8-year point all the way to the next 8-year point. But the Leo star cycle is even more than 100 years. So, for most signs, it averages about 100 years. But for Leo, it began in 1987. The very first Leo star point began in 1987. So it's still fairly new, okay? These kids, these little ones that were born in 1987 are just coming of age now. They're just getting their first Saturn return. They're just coming into the flowering of their period of life where they become known. And when I wrote the book 14 years ago, when I started the research in 2004, I hardly had any Leo examples. I had to go back to the prior period of the Leo history. But we'll look at some of the Leo star points now, and we'll look at the whole 100-year period. It goes from 1987 all the way to 2100. So the Venus star spends a lot more time in Leo than any other sign. She just loves Leo for some reason.
No surprise.
And so we're going to look at, the personal to the more collective, and then ultimately the global timelines of what this Leo star means, focusing mainly on the Leo star because, we've done other webinars. We did the Scorpio star point where we focused on that, and the Capricorn one and the Aries one, but now we're going to tell you about Leo, and hopefully the next one down the road in 2020, as Julia said, we're going to be meeting in person somewhere on the globe and celebrating that one together. somewhere in the
Yes,
Gemini
please. That is something, that's our mission now for the next 9.5 months. We have to work out what's going on there. That would be awesome.
We just have to find out where we're going to do it. We have a few places in mind, but we don't have it all locked down yet. But stay tuned.
Here is my idea, and this is something I'm working on for next week, is looking at the star points on mundane astrolocality maps as well for oneself. Very interesting. A few other things that I'm going to be doing next week is I'm going to get 2 people from who have booked in to see us do their charts with their Venus star going through. So an example, hands-on example. And I've been looking at Facebook is always, in the limelight, but especially in the last, since the Scorpio point, they've been really held up for their data collection and all that type of thing. So I'm going to be looking at the Facebook chart and Mark Zuckerberg's chart as well as a mundane example of working with the Venus star as well. And so Gemini, what about you? Where are we going with you next week? We can't hear you. Hang on. Unmute.
Sorry, can I share a few slides again?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, I just kind of want to get back into the, conquering the lion, or perhaps this is just like, surfing. And a look at why I've, through really Ariel and your guidance, Julie, and our time together here in my work with the sky, kind of shifted from the idea of this as Libra cycle to a Scorpio Libra cycle to this is a Scorpio Leo cycle. And I'm looking at these as 19 months, the Mayan period, 584 days for Venus, the astronomical 583.92 days, and seeing it as a mirror of 2 archetypes. I mean, I guess kind of in Gemini style. So one thing I'll be doing is presenting an ephemeris that just shows you which cycle were you born into in this regard. Was it Capricorn, Scorpio? Was it Leo, Gemini, etc. And then looking also at these T-squares and how the Moon, Mercury, Uranus at this time is pointing to where Venus was in October, and just how at that time in October of 2018, the Mercury, Jupiter, and Mars and Moon were pointing to where Venus is now. So seeing how these degrees are really bringing in this kind of dual side of one cycle, bringing our consciousness into the fixed cross. And speaking more about this mantra, fix yourself to fix the world. So not only will I be speaking about Leo and Scorpio, but also about Aquarius and Taurus in this regard, and bringing that full balance of that great square of the zodiac. And also showing how the midpoint, I guess, of fixed signs of the October 2018 Scorpio star point, and this one coming up, is right at a cross quarter. And so it's cool for us to be meeting at this time, this 8/8 Lionsgate. I've said that a few times, but I can't tell you how many messages I've been getting the last few years. And today it was like 40, and I try to be like honor temperance, but it's tricky when people are sending me these articles about how now Sirius and Orion's belt align with the Great Pyramids, and how the Maya knew about this 4,000 years ago, and just all of these things where people are not really vetting their information. So I think, and the thing with...
So where do they get that from?
Well, what happens is somebody writes something that is like not in any way supported by nature, and then you just read it online and you regurgitate it. And, there's some interesting numerological things. I will say this about 8/8 in our time, really in all times.
Infinity.
This is the cross quarter, right? This is the time halfway between solstice and equinox. These are powerful times, right? We usually celebrate Lammas or Lugnasa on August 1st, but it's 15 degrees Leo. That's exactly halfway between the solstice and the equinox. And there is certainly a serious relation in our time, and this shifts with precession, but in our time, this is about the time of Sirius's heliacal rise. And so that would bring me back to the Venus material. And there's one more thing I want to say, just in reflecting in the 4-year, switch, because I did go at that time in 2015 to Hawaii, and I spent some time there. I later found out I have Venus conjoined Haumea in my nativity, and I was in Hawaii, like having this Venus celebration, which is pretty amazing because Haumea is the creator goddess of Hawaii. But at that time, I remember first coming into the Hawaiian sovereignty movement and the like anti-telescope movement, right? And this is a huge theme right now, and maybe folks aren't aware of this right now. And I really hope you'll go, if you're not right now, and go look at We Are Mauna Kea, Maunakea, and look at what's happening out there, because I'm seeing in this cycle a very significant link where Scorpio is a shared factor of the 2014 Capricorn happening. And of course, right now, and we're being asked right now, what is honor? What is radiant leadership? What is it to be? And what is it to hold the torch, I think? And we see a lot of really poor examples of that in our world. So this is a movement, I think, that just as Standing Rock was a couple years back now, that we really are called to get behind. And so I hope you all have a look at that. I'll speak some about that and about what true royalty is in the webinar next week. I'm really looking forward to sharing and reconnecting with the two of you and with Adam again.
Loved by the people. Loved by the people. Trusted by the people. That's what we want. Isn't that the real Leo King kind of analogy to love your leader? But we can't say that, can we? So yeah, good message there for sure. Just continuing, Adam Gainsbourg is going to, as I was saying before, present on the real sky kind of astrology over the next 9.5 months, what Venus points to and where she flies through, let's say. And just more on what I will be doing. Last year when we did the Scorpio star, it happened just after the CIA was hacked. And the star point that happened in that period, we were hacked like about April last year. The star point that happened before that happening, and this is the thing about, I always say the star point is active before it comes into exactness, right? We've been feeling it for the last couple of months, and then the next one sort of crosses over like eclipse points, right?
Yeah.
And so the star point happened on our ascendant. Our ascendant is 23 Capricorn, and it happened very close, and Pluto was there, and boom, we got hacked a few months later. We got our page back and stuff, as you know. And then when I looked back at the star point 4 years before that, and this is what got me really interested in these four-point markers as well, the retrograde happened on our ascendant, the Capricorn one, and this is when our Facebook page started rising by 20,000 fans a week. We were going up like skyrocketing. You know, this is what got us our 1.5 million fans, and it's never been the same again, but it was amazing. So the other thing about working with Venus star points, is Ariel was saying, is putting it into electional astrology, to know where it's coming up, and, you can tweak the chart and go, yeah, Venus star point might be good on the midheaven. I mean, it's at the same time as it's empowering, it can be very, very confronting. So again, working with that, we're working with some really strong energy. So again, be careful of the magic, so to speak, or what you're putting out there, but really potent when you see it operating, again, like an invisible kind of, it's not invisible to us anymore, is it, agents, as we've been working with it for so long. And see, what's coming up with the star points. Very exciting stuff. So let me just finish with the share.
We have 2 questions in the question box.
Okay, sure. Can you read them out, Ariel? Because I'm...
Sure. Let's see if I can open that.
Can you see them?
Marty says, when aspects like this happen, Venus star point trine Pluto being facilitating energy, hits a conjunction that is kind of difficult in the natal chart. Would you say the trine energy helps alleviate the harsher aspect? Yeah, of course. Sometimes you get it happening with two different aspects, but I never see the Venus star happening as, I mean, it's a difficult, okay, it can sound like a difficult energy because right now it's quincunx Pluto, but I always see the Venus star as also bringing comfort, love, light, the heart, hope, connection, relationship, all those things to it. So it's, you know, someone asked me, oh, the other day, this current Venus star point was going to be opposing her Mars. And she goes, oh, that doesn't sound good, opposite my Mars. And I'm like, Venus to Mars? Venus brings love and light. And, you know, this is the Venus and Mars have a charge anyway, dynamic charge. And it's like, well, sure. But what it's pointing to is it's activating that planet for you. It's like a supercharged awakening of that planet. And it's asking you to kind of use it. And I'm going to show you in some of my slides with the political people how their own Mars and Plutos are being activated right now, and how that's the kind of strength and courage they need to get up there and to say what they're saying and to, you know, make the statements that, you know, the very bold statements. It's like the biggest thing that's ever happened to them in their life. So yeah, I would say that.
I just wanted to add, Ariel, that, you know, for all of us, different star points are going to be more significant. You know, of course, we can work with them and co-create with them, but there will be some, when you do the research into your own sort of cycle of the star and the particular points, yeah, which ones, you know, have got the most aspects or most confronting or whatever, you've got to do your own homework, really. You know, particularly this Capricorn star point is very significant for the CIA. You know, there are other points for all of us that would be the most significant somehow by aspects and everything else that's going on. So yeah, so this is what we've got coming up next week, next Thursday night, same time, same bat chat. Well, different link. You'll have to register to actually be on this 4-hour journey, the 4-hour tour that we have coming up with these wonderful agents, and great material. As you can see, I mean, there's so much to talk about. There's so much to consider and actually work with, that we're learning so much from each other as well as we do it, which is quite a thrill, a real thrill. Before we finish, for anyone in Melbourne that might be watching this, we have Maurice Fernandez here this Sunday for a half-day workshop. So please join us if you can, or if you don't know about it. And of course, keep an eye out for what's coming up with the CIA membership. The part of what Ariel will be presenting as part of her agent mission is that what we do next week will also be available to watch for the members, not at the live time, but as a recording. So you get a lot of great offerings being part of the CIA membership. And thank you to all those that actually continue to join us for what's going on. We had a great webinar last week with Tad Mann on epigenetics and astrology. If people don't know his system of working about the 9.5 months before birth and how important. There we go. There's a Venus point. The time of gestation of the 9.5 months before we are born is very significant. Really amazing insights into that. The week before, 2 weeks before, we had Laura Boomer Trent talk about Mary Magdalene and the Divine Feminine, which was part 1 of a big journey that she's taking us on. So some really cool stuff going on with the CIA. We love to share, we love to learn from each other, and it's great to have you both part of it. Some closing words, agents. We should wrap up and leave it for next week.
Yeah, well, I'm excited that you'll share some mapping stuff.
Yeah.
That's like the one mapping book I haven't been able to get yet, Ariel, is the one that you wrote, Jim Lewis, because
it's been out of print for a long time.
I know, I saw one, but it's like $1 million, so I'm waiting. I'm hunting it down.
Yeah, right. What are those?
I can't afford to buy them either. They're online for $500 or something.
Right.
Yeah.
It's cool to see that the zenith point for this Cazimi will be so close to India, where we'll meet up and in this
exactly.
9.5 month
So
area, and then
I've got
the IC points in Mexico, where I'll be having a retreat this October. So it's really cool to look at the maps and see how these planetary
basically,
activations.
there's a 0 point of Aries somewhere in your astro map, right? And, you know, pretty much align the points that way. But you can also use that with horary and that type of thing. So I love experimenting, probably more than anything with astrology. I think all of us nerds. Anyway, cool stuff. So thank you guys. Thank you for everyone for being online. Thank you for everyone that joined us on Facebook. Sorry, we're not kind of monitoring the Facebook thread at the moment. But look, just encouraging you all, as the CIA's mission is to encourage you all to do more astrology. Learn astrology for yourself. There's enough free stuff around to actually encourage you to get your chart, know how it's moving, know how the transits are working, and from that, the fractal just starts opening more and more and more. And if you want to know more and more significantly study, then join the CIA. You won't be disappointed. So thank you guys. I look forward to seeing you both next week, and for your wonderful talks I know that are coming up. And the rest of you, have a great Venus Star Point Leo, and co-create joy and happiness for yourselves everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next time. See you next week.
See you next week. Okay, thanks.